Van harte welkom bij Blue Tiger Studio in Groningen. Mijn naam is Tom Zwitser en vandaag aan tafel gaat het over John McAfee. En dit boek in het Nederlands voor het eerst verschenen bij de Amsterdam Books uitgeverij. De uitgever zit hier aan tafel en de auteur. Ontzettend leuk, want John McAfee was een ontzettend intrigerende persoon. Hij stierf in 2020 onder, nou ja, wat de achterflap zegt, verdachte omstandigheden. En zo is dat ook een beetje in de pers naar voren gekomen. Wij gaan dat allemaal voorleggen en meer dan dat aan de auteur en de uitgever die hier aan tafel zitten. En die bezig zijn aan een trip door Nederland om het boek te bespreken, te promoten. En om te zorgen dat u nieuwsgierig wordt dit boek te kopen. En dit boek is ook verkrijgbaar bij de Blauwe Tijger, dus u kunt het ook gewoon bij ons bestellen. Thank you for having you in the Blue Tiger studio, Mr. Mark Eglinton.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
All the way from Scotland.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed.
And from Amsterdam, Ralph Dekker. Thank you for being here as well. Not the first time.
No, but the first time in English.
Yeah, that's right. At least we try it.
Yes. So Mark has an advantage there.
Yeah, I need one advantage.
We'd like to talk about the book, but
Sure.
When we talked about it in the conversation before, you told me that you had because this man has been died for 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I thought at first the book might be written after his death, but then you told us that you knew him very well and that it was meant to be a ghostwriting biography.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and that's the result. So it didn't finish the project as a ghostwritten biography.
Exactly.
And then you did it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just to explain, John and I made contact on social media, as you can do. I ghostwrite for various people, whether it be sports people, musicians, in all walks of life. And we agreed to work on an autobiography with me as the co-writer, ghostwriter, whatever you want to call it. And that fell apart for a number of different reasons. And we ended up with a different format of book, which was written long before John died. This was a book that was actually complete and finished 2 months before John's passing. And I had delivered it to a publisher in April of 2021 with a view to it being published in what I think is a very unique format, because I did some research about this kind of thing and found very few examples of books where you had people having a dialogue. It's just not conventional, where you have one person asking questions, another person answering them. And I thought this was really novel. So that's where the idea came from, and we went with it, and I'm very glad it turned out like that. And I'm very glad that the Dutch people at Amsterdam Books sort of shared my vision for this.
How many translations are there from the book?
Well, there's others that are in progress at this stage. As it stands, it's out in the US, it's out in the UK yesterday, and also out in Holland, but there's a couple more coming.
Wow,
Yeah.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Before we go to the process of the book, what kind of man was John McAfee? It was an unbelievable life he lived.
Yeah, I've said before, I think the craziest life ever lived. This was a man who was a genius. He was impulsive. He was deeply selfish. He was deeply empathetic. John McAfee was a man of just endless contradictions. And I think one of the things that I took away from working with him was that we all are. You know, I think I had certain views about what I was as a human being in terms of what my qualities were and what they weren't. John taught me that we all have these. We all have weaknesses. We all have strengths.
And he had it only in a very, everything was big with him.
Yeah, everything was huge. And he lived life on a scale that just other people can't. Now, I need to qualify that and say this was a guy that made a lot of money. And if I was to try and live a life like he lived, I'd probably be homeless in 24 hours. But John had $100 million plus, and if you have $100 million plus, you can live this life, and he did it. And he did it with no regrets. So that fascinated me, and it still fascinates me that somebody could live the life he lived. And, you know, it encouraged me to live my life differently, albeit I haven't figured out quite how to do it yet.
Okay. So you learned a lot.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. And I made a great friend too. I mean, I don't agree with everything John did, and I've made that clear throughout this process. There are some aspects of his life I don't agree with, and I don't agree with everybody on everything. But I left the process liking him a great deal. In fact, a bit more than liking him. I felt a great fondness to him.
Okay. You ghostwrited many books. And what kind of people did you ghostwrite the biography?
The one previous to this was a soccer player, Michael Owen, who played for England and Liverpool.
Yeah, the man with the wonderful goal in '98.
Exactly.
Against Argentina.
The great goal against Argentina.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that goal is that we actually reenacted it in his kitchen when we were doing the project. And he used the trash bin to represent one of the Argentinian defenders, another kitchen object to represent the goalkeeper, and he had me in a certain position, and we walked this through in his kitchen.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that this kind of career that I do gets you into.
At that moment, the world thought that that there was a soccer player talent with a great future. But actually, that was his most famous moment.
Yeah, you're right.
Of his entire career.
That was part of the story.
It's tragic.
How he was this young superstar who exploded on the world scene, and then, because of a number of reasons, injuries mainly, his career slowed down, and he probably wasn't the talent that he could have been. But a lot of the book was him wanting to redress some of these issues, that people had misconceptions about some of the things he did. So that was my previous book, and that's an example of the kind of people who I've worked with in the past. And it is all part of just a wonderful job.
Nice.
But you didn't know him, McAfee.
No.
I mean, McAfee was the hero of the techies in the late 70s
Yep.
and early 80s,
Yep.
and later on as well. But did you try to contact him through Twitter or something like that?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And you know, the world we're in now, these people are accessible in a way that they just weren't. I mean, if you had tried to contact someone back in the 80s or the 90s, how do you even do it? Nowadays, you send a direct message and hope he answers. And he did, very quickly. He came back to me and said, yep, let's do this. Will it cost me anything? Which was a strange first question. And I said, no, it won't cost you anything. It might cost me something. And we started this friendship, which was us kind of sizing each other up. Do I trust you? Do I think that you will do the job properly? In every other book that
It was a hard process.
Well, in some ways it was hard, but in other ways it was very easy, because with everybody else I've ever worked with, you know, we have collaboration agreements, non-disclosures, all that kind of thing. With John, we looked at each other on Skype and said, you going to come after me if I don't do what you tell me to? I said, nope. Are you going to do anything? No. So it was like a sort of visual handshake. Yeah, let's do this. There was no contract, no collaboration.
Wow.
But he was on the run at the time.
Yeah, he was on the run. I think that
his
changed
whereabouts
the
were
position.
unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for what exactly was he on the run?
John was on the run for, according to him, and this is an important thing, because what John thought was happening in his life and what might have been happening may be two different things.
Okay.
But on paper, he'd been, a grand jury had indicted him for tax evasion in the US. This was non-filing of tax returns for 10 years. And his opinion on taxes was, I've paid enough, I'm not paying any more. And you know, he'd been living out of the country, hadn't been driving on US roads, been living in Belize, and thought, well, if I'm not benefiting from the infrastructure of the US, why should I pay tax towards it? Now, there's lots of people that don't pay tax in lots of countries that don't get chased by three-letter agencies. But where I believe John got into trouble was that not only did he not pay tax, he went out there and started talking about cryptocurrency and saying,
That was a real danger.
that changed the game, because it's one thing not doing it, it's another thing telling people how they can not do it too. And I think that made him a target. I mean, that in combination with the fact that he had a public profile already, he'd run for president as a libertarian candidate, he had 1 million followers on Twitter, all of a sudden he focused this attention on himself in an attempt to spread the message, and became wanted on that basis. And that was what forced him into hiding. And when I first made contact with him, he was in hiding. I didn't know where he was. He never told me. I only found out after he died.
Is it so easy to keep on the run and
No.
stay out of government?
It isn't. I mean, John tried. He left the US on a yacht in 2019, went to Bahamas, got flushed out of the Bahamas, ended up in Cuba, ended up in the Dominican Republic.
All on his yacht?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on his yacht he was safe?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're in the ocean, but there's only so long you can stay there.
Yeah.
So you have to dock somewhere.
Yeah, and fuel up. And
Yeah, all these things. Yeah. And he just ran out of places to do it. And ultimately got to the Dominican Republic, was arrested, and given the option of being extradited to either the US or his country of birth, which was actually the UK. John was born in the UK, the son of a US serviceman. Lived all his life in the US, but he had that advantage of 2 passports.
Wow.
So he got extradited to the UK and then disappeared to wherever he went between 2019 and when he died. But I now know it was Spain.
But he was let's say he was an early tech genius in such a way that in the 70s, techie guys who knew how to work with computers were very scarce, so, and the whole business was growing. So wherever he went to work in big companies, they needed his skills. So in no time, he made a huge difference there. Hardly ever came to work, but when he came, he changed the whole thing. So he was paid very, very handsomely, and he worked his way from one company to another across various countries. He was in Germany, in Brazil.
Yeah.
It's great, for instance, when there was an opening in Brazil, very important opening, and the company people were asked, who speaks Portuguese? And then he said, well, I speak Portuguese. He didn't, but he spoke a bit of Spanish. But based on that, he was sent to Brazil, where he had to manage 200 programmers, something like that. And the first thing he said was, okay, guys, your big problem here is that no one speaks English. I'm going to change that. So, and that whole company became a big success, and in no time he made a difference there as well. And they paid him handsomely. It was time after time was the same story.
Yeah.
And every time, and again, he was even more successful. And then alongside that, he started his own company, basically in trying to solve these virus problems.
Yeah.
And he was the first there. So he was the hero of the tech company. I know because I was joining the tech of Amro Bank in '82.
Okay.
And that was sort of the era in which he was really thriving.
Absolutely, yeah. You were a couple of years before the beginning of McAfee antivirus, which...
Yeah, that's 82.
I started '82, but
And he did?
McAfee Antivirus as a company started in 84, 85.
Wow.
But there was a build-up to this.
But there were hardly computers. They were big as these rooms.
Yeah, there were mainframe computers.
Yeah. There were already viruses for that computer kind
They were starting to appear, and John preempted all of this. He had what's called a message board. He was literally in a sitting room in his house and had a message board where people were communicating very, very simply about computer problems. And this developed into a business and became a very big business that still exists now, but it wasn't intentional. At no point did he say, I'd love to be a corporate boss or anything like that. It just happened by accident. And it was this confluence of threats and solutions. People were making viruses. He had the solution to the viruses,
And those people they weren't the same eventually.
That was well,
like in these times.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that because John said that later, once the kind of main thrust of all the viruses had passed, they actually hired virus makers to help them because these guys weren't making any money. There was no money to be made in making viruses, but there was definitely money to be made in coming on board with a company like McAfee. So he actually sourced some of these guys who'd been out there in the past making his business and his life hell and paid them money. So yeah, that did happen.
But he was a true tech pioneer, and the nice thing is that he stayed on top of this whole area for 20 years or something, even more. Because even in the beginning of the 2000s, he was still a specialist, a know-it-all, talking about crypto and all that sort of thing. So he kept on top of the whole area.
But that's so fascinating about the guy, that he was, most of the times when you have the ultimate computer nerd, John McAfee was the ultimate playboy as well. He had tattoos, he lived a life full of drugs, women, and so on. And he was on top of the tech knowledge as well.
That's a unique position, yeah. And we talk in the book about some of the people who were around him, and he acknowledged as being greater computer brains than he was. And these people were exactly as you described them, people who were socially incapable of communicating, people who only understood the computer world, not people like him who understood the computer world but could live huge lives as well. I think John was the first person to ever be able to do that, those two roles.
Yeah. I would say he was a brilliant man, but he was also a full animal. You know, he lived all his everything you could do. He did it.
Yeah.
And was that the reason that he saw the possibilities of the cryptos in a very early stage as well? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think John was somebody, as I said before, he saw problems before they became problems.
In the financial system?
Yeah, financial system he was always very skeptical about. He was always, and that went hand in hand with his skepticism about security, cybersecurity, etc. And I think he saw crypto as a solution to both of those in terms of privacy of finances and financial freedom, which he believed very strongly in and had demonstrated himself that he believed in it. He believed that your earnings were your own business and it's not the business of governments to interfere in. Now that's a debate that's raging at the moment. Governments taking different stances on that. Ultimately, we need to make a decision. Do we want to be controlled by technology or do we want to control it? And I think we're at that point in this whole trajectory now where we're going to see what's going to happen. Because I think governments are going to want to control crypto in their own way. How that plays out, we shall see.
In our conversation before, you spoke about, well, it was because of the cryptos the U.S. government began to chase him. What happened exactly?
Well, John, just to give a bit of the history, John was in Belize where he was accused of murdering his neighbor.
Oh.
Fled Belize in a much publicized flight that was documented by Vice magazine, filmed. And this was his choice. He wanted it to be public. Came back to the US, was chased around by a bunch of bad guys, cartel members, he said.
Mexicans.
Mexican cartel members. He told me, this is John's impression of what was happening. Armenian businessmen, all of them involved with the Belizean government. His wife's pimp, who was chasing him apparently. In the background to all of this, he was appearing at hacking conferences like DEF CON and had become something of the hero to the hacking community, which is a deeply ironic position when you consider that this was somebody who was fighting these people. He became almost on their side, and they held him up as a hero.
And they helped him as well.
Absolutely. Anonymous helped him escape Belize.
Yeah?
By shutting down the Belizean government computer system for a while and stuff like that, according to John. But this was somebody who was he had crossed the boundary between what he once did and what he was now and became like an anti-hero for the hacking community. But he ended up leaving the US in 2019, as you say, because of the tax issues. And from that point, I think he knew he was isolated. He was out there in the world. In fact, I said last night to the group we were talking to, the original title of the book was Alone in the World, because I think John felt when he left the US on a yacht, his options were very limited. He felt very lonely in that he had nowhere else to go.
Yeah. And so the immediate reaction or response from the US government on cryptos was that it was a real danger to this tax system and the financial system.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. I mean,
and what year was that?
The 2019 was when it became a grand jury issue. I suspect there was probably conversations happening before then, but in the time between 2019 and 2021 when he passed away, it was definitely a very big issue. And as we can see in terms of what's happening with governments now, it's a much bigger conversation than it's ever been. And the reason that has happened is because I think governments are realizing this is unstoppable. You know, this isn't something that can be kind of put back in the box.
They really can't control it?
Well, I think they can, but I don't think it's something I think it's something that people can resist, legitimately resist, because the blockchain, and I have to say this, I'm not a full expert on the ins and outs of the blockchain, but my understanding of it is that it can't really be interfered with by outside parties, and I think that's a real worry for governments, and you know, I understand why it is, but that's the reality.
The only thing governments can do with the cryptos is buy a lot of them and speculate with prices and.
Or that's possible, but I think what we're seeing is governments attempting to formalize their relationship with crypto and say, okay. We can't beat you, but let's join you and create something that is like the official American crypto.
That's the CBDCs.
Precisely, and that is that position that I'm describing, where you know we need to be careful that we're not controlled all of a sudden by something that we thought was freedom.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, I think, where we will miss guys like John McAfee,
Yeah.
because he had a deep sense of freedom in the classical terms almost, combined with a deep understanding of technology, which gives you an enormous potential power to try and avoid the almost unavoidable direction everything seems to be moving towards.
Yeah.
So in that respect, I think we're going to miss him.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think we shouldn't be skipping over the period 92 where he was leaving and 2019 where he was chased by the American government.
But that's
because his life in this period is completely insane.
Yeah, but I knew him from Russia Today when he had a lot of appearances in 2014, 15, 16, maybe later. Then I wasn't watching anymore because in the Ukraine crisis I watched Russia Today a lot of many times, and John McAfee was on many shows commenting on what was going on. Yeah. Was that also a danger that he was very he was not affiliated with Russia, but he was.
I don't know if that was something that he saw as a danger. I'm not sure that's something that even John cared about. John didn't really worry about what stances he took, and he didn't really align himself with any party either side. We had conversations about Trump and right and left in the US. John didn't really have a position that he took on these things. John was somebody who was willing to dispense with the traditional left-right views and take positions according to how he felt. And sometimes they were conflicted. And ultimately he ran as a libertarian candidate in the US in both 2016 and 2020.
Together with the Paul family?
2016 he ran with Judd Weiss, who is actually the chap who's doing the NFT with Amsterdam Books here. Okay. And I said to John, did you ever think you could be president? He said, of course not. That was never my plan. My plan was just to do this because I could. You know, this is fun. And what it invited for John was the opportunity to do absolutely crazy, unhinged campaign videos of him on jet skis with guns and women clinging to his back. And he could bring every situation he was in his life back to the McAfee meme, which was this crazy, mad tech guy who did what he wanted. John managed to find that in everything he did.
Did he have any acquaintance to Ron Paul?
Not that I know of.
Because they're in a similar sort of political realm at the time.
Absolutely,
so there are different libertarian parties.
I think there are, yes. I don't know the specifics of that, but John was the official libertarian candidate, or one of them, for the 2016 election, and really wasn't that far from being elected as the libertarian candidate. There was a lot of people who were backing the McAfee thing, but I think they backed the McAfee thing not for his policy, but because, listen, who can't approve of what John is doing with his life? It is too much fun, and I think fun is a word that needs to be remembered a lot with John.
But he was chased in the period that Donald Trump was president.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people here in the Netherlands still praised the Trump era because there was a lot of freedom, and they say, well, if Trump still was in power, then we wouldn't be in war with Russia, etc., etc. But the system then, in the Trump era, was still chasing real freedom-spirited people.
Yeah, I think that plays into something that John and I discussed about the position of president and what it actually means. And one thing that John said is that you could pull someone off the street, just a vermin,
and put him there.
Put him there, and they would do the same job. And I said, why is that? He said, because the president isn't making the decisions. The decisions are coming from the people above the president. I said, who are they? He said, there's your, call it deep state, call it what you want, but these people who are presidents are merely transient puppets. They're actors, and they're there to act, and all the major decisions are being made from above. So when you say that was happening in the Trump regime, yes, because it happens in every regime, I think.
Oh, it's similar that we published a book in German in November, and it's called Game Over, and it's telling the same story. So it's all, and he shows the writer. He shows all the names and puppets and which places they take and what role they play, etc.
Yeah, and John understood all this,
which
which was fascinating for me because I didn't understand that before.
But he saw it from inside.
Yeah. exactly.
What knowledge did he brought from his, because he reached the top of the tech companies and he saw everything which was going on there, which courses and decisions were made and what directions they were heading to. What did he learn from it? Did he see it as a threat to freedom?
Of course. I mean, I think he understood that, technology is one of these things that we all like. I mean, it has made our lives immeasurably better in one respect, but at the same time, you find yourself in Australia during the COVID crisis with an app that the government can use to establish whether you've left your home. So I think John understood that. There are benefits, but as soon as we go the other way, we find ourselves in a situation where freedom is fundamentally threatened by technology, and he was he was warning that long before it ever became a reality. And there is another element to this in that John worked for the CIA on a black program prior to starting McAfee antivirus. He was hired at the time he was working for Lockheed Martin and was approached by the CIA to work on a black program, which he never gave me details of. He said, I just can't tell you what the details were. He said, all you need to know is that the work we were working on in 1981 is only now becoming a reality in the world, which gave me a sense of just how far ahead these organizations are working.
They're working 30 years ahead.
Yeah, what is it they're doing that will become a reality in 20 or 30 years' time? Now, there may be good elements of work that are happening. Let's be real, there will be aspects that are helpful, but there may be aspects that are not, and we just don't know these things, and we have no way of knowing them until all of a sudden they are a reality. But John knew all this, so he was in a unique position.
And he never mentioned what kind of things the CIA was working then.
Couldn't tell me. He said that the punishment was death, which may have been an exaggeration.
But he is dead.
Yes. Yeah.
How suspicious is that?
I don't think so. Originally, I did. I thought, I don't know if people are aware of the dead man's switch conversations that happened around the time when John died. There was a suggestion that if he died, there would be information released, etc. I think that was John bluffing.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And that was John's way.
So he really committed suicide?
I think he did.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been back and forth on this in my own mind over the months since it happened.
But the system he was fighting, they have quite a record in killing people in jail.
Yep. I don't doubt that. I think John was going to be extradited ultimately to the US. And he did say to me in some conversations, if I ever end up in jail in the US, I will just disappear. And John McAfee, with the ego he had, the sort of the joy of living, I think would have really struggled from an ego perspective to be in some anonymous prison in Iowa or wherever. And I think he thought the prospect of that age 75 was just not worth. I think he would have found that to be a very unsatisfactory end. And it may be he weighed it all up and thought, had a good life, had a good run, this is the end. That's my feeling. I do believe that.
He was 75 at the end, so it was quite old because when I remember him from just a few years ago, he was full of tattoos. He was a strong man.
Yeah.
He had a good, healthy, appearance.
Yeah. Prison broke him. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he tweeted from prison, not himself, but he relayed information to be tweeted. And if you looked at the trajectory and the narrative of that, it started being quite. At the beginning, it was quite, aggressive and punchy. It became a little bit more resigned over a period of time. It got to the point where he was saying, I am happy in here. If this is what my life is. The food is okay. I've met some friends, etc. I felt, knowing John as I did, him becoming resigned to his position. The last video I saw of him, where he was pleading his case by video call, he was a third of the weight that he was when I spoke to him. He was emaciated, almost unrecognizable.
He was big. He was very.
John was a big, strong man, as you say, and I think the life had been machined out of him a little bit in prison.
Well, he did lead at least a dozen normal lives.
Yes.
That's without exaggeration.
That he made it to 75 was a
is
miracle
amazing.
on itself.
Yeah. Because when you look at all the drugs he used, all the women he had, all the various escape
Faked
tricks
heart
that
attacks.
unbelievable.
Yeah, he faked a heart attack, faked a stroke somewhere else. And
Yeah.
he did all this stuff with real calculation. You know, on one occasion he faked a heart attack knowing that his lawyer had 1 hour to submit an appeal to stop him being extradited from, on this occasion, the Dominican Republic. He knew there was an hour window, and he thought, how can I find an hour? And I said, okay, what'd you do? He said, I fake a heart attack. He said, if I look like I've had a heart attack, people will have to come. Medical people will have to come. They will have to check me out. They will have to take me to hospital. They will have to go through the process. Therefore, very easy to use an hour. Meanwhile, he has a lawyer in the background drawing up an appeal and getting him out of it. He said, you've got to make these moves, he said. I learned how to make moves very young in life, to escape prisons, to escape bad situations.
What kind of youth did he have?
Well, John was important youth in that his father was abusive. His father committed suicide when he was 15, shot himself.
Yeah.
John, I asked John, how did you feel about that? And he said, actually good, you know, because that moment was when I realized that was the only figure of authority that I would ever have to worry about in life. And from that moment, he respected no authority. And that meant he went through life as a sort of young teenager, young adult, doing what he wanted, womanizing, taking drugs, drinking, but at the same time, achieving a great deal of expertise in his business. That's the key to John. John wasn't just a player. John was somebody who took care of business first, but then did the playing on the side. He always had that backup of being a mathematical genius. And he said to me on a number of occasions, I apply mathematics to every aspect in life, including women. And I remember saying, I'm not really sure how that works. You need to explain how you apply mathematical formulas to your relationship with women. We never got there, but John always did that kind of stuff.
Well, that wasn't quite using your genius as a backup for life. It was using your genius all the time.
Yeah.
Well, one of the amazing things that I had when I read the book was, you know, we discussed that when we came here, that all of us have some plans, some ideas, and then you think about it and you abandon the idea again because it's not feasible or too complex or whatever. What he did was not just having ideas, but fully implementing them before actually abandoning them. Yeah. So he set up, he wanted to have jet skiing over hundreds of miles as an Olympic sport. Well, you and I can think about it for 5 seconds as well. He implemented it. So he went and tried that with a friend, and indeed on jet skis on the ocean go for 200-300 miles, which is extremely dangerous. But he simply did that and had a number of these jet ski machines. Same thing was this microplane thing
aero
that he
tracking.
had.
Yeah.
That's a one-person plane that is flying 10 meters above the ground or something, which is nice. But he started to set up a whole series of airstrips in order to accommodate that across the US. And he actually put these strips up. It was a great success until his nephew, who was joining him all the time, had a big accident and died. Wow. And that's when he abandoned the whole thing. He set up a large number of houses everywhere, the most unbelievable houses that he had built, but never lived in them because he simply didn't have the time, and then sold them again. At a certain moment in time, he decided to withdraw and build a big house and start a yoga thing in there. So a bit of a yoga lessons and all that, but very, very big, mainly because through that he could get women to the house. But he did actually get his yoga degrees. He got himself educated by the Maharishi himself.
He took it fully serious.
He was a full teacher of yoga. So that whole complex of yoga became a huge complex. Actually very successful. But then again, there was a reason to abandon that again as well. So every thought that he had which appealed to him, he actually implemented it to the very full. Yeah. Which makes his life a series of incredible stories. It's amazing. I can go on. What he did in Belize, that's amazing.
I think the thing that struck me about it was that in all these instances, he was quite happy to walk away from it all, particularly the aero trekking business, which, you know, granted there was a tragic end to his nephew's life, but I think John told me that he didn't even sell some of his property. He just invited people from the local neighborhood to come and take it away. There was no attachment to any material. As much as he invested in making material things, he had no attachment to it personally. He was quite happy just to say, okay, come and take this stuff away. I don't need any money, and I'll go and do the next thing. And that's a tremendous level of freedom that you have to feel about life to be able to do that. And as I said, if normal people tried to do it, you'd be on the street. But John managed to do it all the way through his life.
And that's why, to me, this is really the true freedom book.
Yeah.
You're free from, you would almost say, you own nothing but you're happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's perhaps the wrong phrase here.
Mm-hmm. But he, at the same time, he was very addicted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To women, money, and everything was instrumental.
Yeah. The drugs part of it's an interesting part because John understood drugs fundamentally and actually went to AA in 1985 and quit completely. And drugs were very important to the programming world. These guys needed to be taking speed to be able to solve problems. It wasn't fun. This was real. We need to stay up all night. Why do we do it?
To solve the problem.
Yeah. Methamphetamine.
Yeah.
But John took it too far, as he always did, and ended up going to AA. And there's a story that he tells about. He met a guy at AA who woke up one morning to find his wife chopped up in bin bags in the garage. This guy had done this to his wife the night before while under the influence of drugs. And John said, when you hear stories like that, you will reassess your life. So John reassessed his life and said, I can't have drugs in my life anymore. And he cut them out until 2012. But John understood what they could do. And he had certain uses for drugs in certain situations. And sex was one of them. He understood, I can get certain drugs that will make you feel this when you're having sex, and told me lots of details that I didn't need to know. But he just understood how that world worked.
Very interesting. What a fascinating man was it.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Ralph, how did you, as a publisher, came across this book? Because it's published today, or yesterday, in the UK, in the US, and in the Netherlands.
Yes, well, I think that's coincidence, but it was presented to me, actually, Thierry presented to me in digital format the first chapter. Said, we can buy the rights to translate this in English and publish it in the Netherlands. What do you think? So I read the first chapter, and it was a page turner right away, because that's when Mark was having this call in the car, and suddenly, I mean, John McAfee was a big name and a bit of a crazy guy. So the story really takes off like crazy. So I was page turning the first chapter. I said, we need to do this, and that was the only remark Thierry needed in order to decide indeed that we were going to do this thing. And it's been fun. It's really. Sometimes you come across a book like that, and it's a no-brainer.
But it's also very inspirational for the freedom movement in our own countries. In all Western countries, freedom is under heavy pressure. And reading this book, having this man as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's got several layers in that respect, because it is an adventure book. When you read it, you can simply read it as a...
It's a page turner.
Exactly, but at the same time, and you realize it slightly later, it's a token of ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
Which you only come to realize afterwards. And then it's also about crypto, it's about technology, so everything sort of falls into place. That's the nice part, I think, of this book. So you can read it as a nice book on the beach because it's an interesting read, but there's also layers beneath that give it more meaning. So it's a fascinating thing.
Yeah. Some people have made comments to me about it since, to an extent that I didn't really appreciate myself, in that John is not somebody who explicitly signposts information for people, if that's an expression that makes sense. He is more subtle. He leaves what we'd say in England or in the UK, breadcrumbs for people, like a trail to follow. Yeah. And there was one in particular that somebody raised, which when John was talking about drugs, and he said that he preferred drugs sourced from the Chinese industrial drug manufacturers. And he made this throwaway line to me. He said, yeah, they use that for sort of mind control in China, the Chinese Communist Party. And I was like, oh, okay. That came out of nowhere whatsoever. All of a sudden, we are confronted with the information that China are making drugs that control mind, which was something I didn't have full knowledge of, but this was something that John McAfee said in passing as a result of his deep exploration of drugs and sex. But that's an example of one of those breadcrumbs that was just thrown out there for the reader.
Yeah.
You know, either you pick up on that or you don't. And that book, I think, is full of those. And even as the person who wrote the book, I didn't identify them all at the time. I've seen them later.
Yeah.
And that was John's skill.
When this is used in China, then there's a high possibility that it is used here.
Well, I mean, do we know what drugs are being used and by whom? We don't. And
But we have all those biolabs, you know,
Yeah.
even in Ukraine, even American biolabs in China itself. So what's the cooperation between those two countries?
Yeah.
And what is applied here in our biolabs, which are controlled by American companies,
Sure.
American government?
Yeah, and that's an example of a question being thrown out. And this book throws out many such questions
Wow.
that asks us to think, what is the picture? There are no conclusions drawn. It's merely pointing to something to say, this is what happens, and it is up to us to decide what we want to look into and what we don't. And I think that's one of the great strengths.
Yeah, because right now we know that when our government has opportunities, when our governments all in the West have certain opportunities, they sooner or later will apply it to us.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said about the three-letter agencies creating programs that come into fruition many years down the line.
30 years ahead.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
And the answer is we don't know, but we'd certainly be doing ourselves a disservice not to be thinking about it. And I think that book and John McAfee is the voice of that kind of thinking.
I just received my first copy, so I will start reading it tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And for being in the Netherlands promoting your book.
Thank you.
When you go back to Scotland, what story will follow?
My next book.
Yeah.
My next book is in existence. I'm working with Steve Bannon on it's a biography of Steve, and in some ways, Steve has been a supporter of this book for me in the US. He had me on his War Room podcast.
This one.
The English edition, the US first published. He got me on there when John died. He got me on there. And Steve understood the McAfee appeal, the fact that he was a true American, a patriot, a renegade. Steve liked that. And I pestered Steve for some time. I want to co-write a Bannon book because I'm fascinated by Steve in the same way as I'm fascinated with John. Yeah. You know, I want to know about the pre-Trump Steve Bannon, you know, Steve Bannon in China, Bannon in Goldman Sachs, Bannon in Hollywood, all these dimensions of Bannon that nobody know about. They just know, you know, what they call sloppy Steve in the White House. Yeah. But there's so much more to him. So Steve said, I don't want to do this. No way, not doing it. I said, okay, let me write a book about you. And will you endorse it as being semi-official, like the definitive Bannon? He said, okay, let's do it.
Nice.
So I'm doing that. And Steve understands that it can't be sycophantic. It can't be me saying Steve Bannon's the greatest person in the world. Steve is perfect. It has to be this balanced take on Steve. And as a result, I'm going to be talking to people who don't like Steve, because I want the light and the darkness of the picture. And this is what I do. This is what I'm trying to do with my career. Is I try not to take too many positions because I can't afford to be judgmental in the actual role with the book. You know, there's subjects that interest me. But at the end of the day, as I said to Ralph when he gave me my politically correct speech, that I need to be this voice of reason, the sort of stable person at the center of the story and conduct the elements to it. So I'll be doing the same with Steve Bannon.
Yeah. I'm very curious because Steve Bannon is a liberty-loving man, as is or was John McAfee.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's a Catholic.
Yep.
He was more active in official structures like government and under Trump and other ones. He failed to have his own monastery in Italy. It must be a very interesting book as well.
There are parallels, and there are also distinct differences. I mean, John was an atheist. John discovered Darwin in 1970, and that was the end of his religion. Steve is a Catholic in the traditional sense. both of them have lived kind of everyman lives, as I would describe it. And these are the people that are really interesting in life. Steve didn't want to be a politician any more than John wanted to be a corporate type. Steve hated the Trump administration. The last thing he wanted to be was a staffer. He did the job to get Trump in power, and he left. And he left because of all the limitations of working in that kind of environment. And Steve is never happier when he's out trying to make monasteries in Italy, or run the war room, or whatever it is. He wants to live. And, you know, when I think about it, there are some similarities between Steve and John in terms of how they live their lives. It's in multi-dimensions, albeit they're very different type of people. But I view Steve as a sort of friend and colleague, but at the same time I want to write an accurate book, a depiction of this life, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it when I get back to Scotland.
There are already books about him.
There are. Yeah. This will be the best.
Yeah.
This will be the best.
I know.
This will be the
We
best.
know it, Rolf.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So yeah, that's next for me, and I like living in my location in Scotland, being detached in some ways, but still able to communicate and do these things. So I'm very grateful to be able to come here and talk about it.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Rolf, thank you for
Thank you for
coming
having
here
us.
and driving Mark all the way to this place. Hartelijk dank voor het kijken. We zijn aan het einde van een heel interessant interview over een nog interessanter boek. Zoals gezegd, dit is voor het eerst dat ik dit boek nu in mijn handen heb. Ik ga hem vanavond lezen. Hij ligt ook al in onze webwinkel. U kunt hem daar aanschaffen. Er liggen, de promotietour is in volle gang, dus er komen ook nog interviews in de andere krant, geloof ik, Ralf?
Ja, er zijn allerlei dingen.
Allerlei dingen aan de gang, want Mark is hier een paar dagen. Dus u zult nog van hem horen. Dus ook in Blue Tiger Studio en in de Blauwe Tijger webwinkel kunt u hem gewoon even aanschaffen. Een van de meest fascinerende levens, misschien van na de Tweede Wereldoorlog. Wij bedanken u voor het kijken. U kunt zich registreren op bluetooth.studio. Daar vindt u een hamburgermenuutje linksboven. En daar kunt u op klikken en dan moet u zich even registreren. En dat is heel fijn, want dan kunnen wij met u in contact blijven. Ook al doen wij dat nu wat spaarzamer via alleen de nieuwsbrieven. Er komt een tijd aan dat dat allemaal veel moeilijker gaat worden. En dan hebben wij, u en wij hebben contact met elkaar op een hele andere manier. En daar zijn we ons op aan het voorbereiden. Dus word daar deel van. Wij bereiden ons echt voor op grotere censuur dan nu gaande is. En dat registratieformuliertje, dat is daar niet voor niks. Dus wij willen u daar heel graag deel van maken. U krijgt dan op dit moment nieuwsbrieven, u kunt meediscussiëren in de comments, u krijgt ook post op de deurmat. En als de grote clash komt, dan hebben wij in ieder geval elkaars contact en gaan we verder ondergronds. Bedankt voor het kijken en tot de volgende keer.